Can you envision a world where you and your family in America and those who immigrated from Africa and the Caribbean could receive immersive financial education and invest in fractional and whole shares of U.S. publicly traded companies? That time has come. Wakeza. Finally, from your mobile phone, you can start investing in building wealth. Wakeza. Just sign up for the Wakeza app and join the Wakeza community to receive ongoing adult and youth financial education from licensed advisors. Wakeza. You become a financially educated and protected investor. Wakeza has one empowering objective: creating financial inclusion and your family's generational wealth for the African diaspora. Wakeza.
Money's scary.
I see a lot of people struggling with how to manage their money.
They aren't keeping track of how much money is coming in and how much is going out.
Most kids don't know how to handle money.
I'm a big spender, not much of a saver, and I think if I had seen something modeled differently earlier, then I probably would have a different relationship with money.
I think World of Money gives them that basis, that financial literacy that they need.
World of Money is a youth financial education training institute. It operates Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4:45 in July of each year.
We go in the morning, we meet with our classroom leader.
Each day is different and each day has a theme and focus. So some days we'll be talking about banking, other days we'll be talking about stocks and bonds.
I did learn a lot about credit scores,
401ks,
gaining interest on money, making your money work for you,
how to save your money,
checking accounts and savings accounts,
and yeah, how to live a better life.
My name is William and handling money is a big responsibility and it should be held in the hands of a responsible person.
Hi, my name is Rachel. I feel like I just graduated from business school, like real university business school.
Just having role models like that come and share their knowledge with us is one example between, learning, gaining success, and then giving back.
And it's just a straight, long line.
Also, one of the cool things that our students learn is Mandarin Chinese.
The 5 tenets of World of Money: learn, earn, save, invest, and donate.
It's helped me become more aware of how much I'm spending and how much I'm saving and how much I'm giving.
It's more about, yes, you've had an opportunity to earn the money. Now, what do you do to improve the lives of those that are around you and, the future generations?
You need to give as your resources, whether that's money or your time, and that's more important than anything.
We have visited the White House about 3 times. Our Young Mogul Board of Directors joined me as I testified on Capitol Hill to talk to Congress about financial education. We've opened or closed the NASDAQ Stock Exchange 4 times. We were on CNBC, we have been on MSNBC, we have appeared on ABC, NBC.
I feel like financial literacy is one of the key components in life. No matter what career path you choose, you will definitely have to encounter finance or any type of financial components in your life, such as whenever you're making your first purchase for your home, which was discussed during the workshops.
Moguls and young moguls, I dare you to become financially successful.
Miss Lamb grooms us to be ambitious, and I think that the tools that she gives us at World of Money are helpful in making sure that those ambitions can be sustained.
After becoming a billionaire, I will invest my money in charities to build schools worldwide that will teach finance.
It's an amazing program. It's done so much more than just teach me about money. It's taught me about being professional, about working hard, about success.
It's worth the time and worth the energy, and I think that your children one day will thank you for it.
Hello, I'm Sabrina Lamb, the founder and CEO of Wakeza.com. Wakeza is a company which is dedicated to providing culturally diverse family financial education, such as investing, as well as investing in U.S. publicly traded companies for those from the African diaspora residing in the United States, as well as I am the founder and CEO of the World of Money, a 19-year nonprofit that is the leading provider of immersive youth financial education for ages 7 to 18 in the United States and worldwide. As the host and producer of Planet Wakiza, we invite financial and legal experts to share their actionable expertise and solutions for you to achieve generational financial security. Today's guest expert is Dr. Joycelyn Morris. She holds a Bachelor of Science and an MBA from Florida A&M University, as well as a Ph.D. in curriculum and instruction from Florida International University. Through her research, Joycelyn seeks to shed light on the systemic barriers that perpetuate wealth disparities, as well as drive meaningful change. Joycelyn is also the principal consultant for JCM Consulting Group, a financial management consulting company which focuses on helping existing businesses succeed by offering strategies for financial management and operations. She is the host and producer of Race, Wealth, and Health, an important podcast for everyone interested in exploring the intersections of race, wealth, and health in communities of color. Welcome to Planet Wakiza, Dr. Joycelyn.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that amazing introduction, Sabrina. It's such a pleasure to be here.
So my immediate question is, because sometimes when we're focusing on one particular and very important issue, it was that tipping point that whether it was professional or personal that drove you to unpacking and finding solutions for wealth disparities. For you, what were they?
Yes. So I guess as part of my introduction, I originally started my career in financial services. So I actually used to work in private wealth management in New York on Wall Street for a large investment bank. And as I was working with and serving our clients, right, just seeing that a lot of the clients, which we work specifically with ultra high net worth individuals, and seeing that a lot of those clients didn't look like me, right? And so that kind of drove me to think, or you or I, right? Not too many clients from the diaspora. And so that drove me to think about what that meant and why we weren't able to show up in those spaces. And so that really was the tipping point. A lot of other things kind of leaving New York and pivoting into the nonprofit space. And that also led to me wanting to study young Black college students. So as you mentioned, I got my doctorate from Florida International recently. And so my research was around looking at the financial knowledges, practices, and behaviors of Black college students specifically. And so really interested because we don't typically show up in the research. So it's very much so a gap, no pun intended, in terms of the research and as it relates to Black people and financial literacy and financial knowledge and practices. So, but yes, I won't go too far there. That was the tipping point. It was being there, being in those meetings, not seeing enough people look like me and wondering why more of us didn't qualify as ultra high net worth.
So there's a lot of research being done, a lot of global conversations happening about this issue. Why should people care? And what are they missing about this issue that everyone should know?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of, so there's two things, right? There's a lot of conversation around financial literacy and financial education. And then there's a lot of conversation around the racial wealth gap. And I'm sure there's a lot of differences about who should care and who cares about what, right? I'll start with the lowest hanging fruit as it relates to financial literacy and education, that everyone should care about that. I think that I was luckier, if you could say, to start my career in 2007, which was right before the big market crash, right? And so we saw what happened. And I think as a country, we realized how much or how important financial education and financial literacy was in terms of some of the decisions that individuals were making and allowing themselves to be, over leveraged in loans and things of that sort around their home, right? That created the Great Recession that was, 2008, 2009. And so I think for our national economy, and we know that we're a global economy, it's important that we're aware. It's important that individuals are able to make good decisions about their financial well-being and able to navigate opportunities, or at least know what questions to ask when they're being presented with these, new and exciting ways to get extra money. So that's the financial education piece. When it comes to the racial wealth gap, I mean, it matters if you care anything about equality, if you care anything about how we're able to come together and be stronger as a nation. It's important that that wealth is distributed, and it's important that people are able to have generational wealth that they can provide to further generations, so that they're able to then truly be able to give back more, right? And those who have are able to make better decisions and be able to show up in the world and be able to give back in a different type of way. And so I think everyone should care. We know that everyone probably does not care, but certainly I think our communities of color, all of our communities of color, should be concerned about this, because it determines, a lot of the decision making, because the wealth and how campaigns are funded and policies are made and how lobbying is done, it affects so much of our communities, our ability to have collective wealth that we can then use to be able to advocate for our communities.
Let's be a little bit more precise, because when we think about communities of color, when we think about race, we're not being precise on who we're talking about. Asians could be considered communities of color. Who specifically are you referring to when you talk about and work your research regarding disparities, wealth disparities?
Yes, fair enough. When it comes to my research specifically, it is, and the racial wealth gap I'm talking about is between white America and Black America, right? And so the differences between those particular groups. But we also know that, and when I say color, I'm typically talking, Black and brown. We also know that there's still, wealth disparities even for our, brown counterparts, our Hispanic or Latin counterparts as well. But specifically, my research is focused on those of within the Black community, those of the diaspora.
Right, and it just would expand that question a little bit, because even within the Black community, there are cultural and generational differences with regard to money. When I think about the Arab community, often, you wouldn't think about all the wealth that they've been able to hold generationally. So I just think it's helpful just to be a little more precise for everyone having this discussion, including myself. We're talking about Black people and white people, all right?
Yes, we're talking about the race.
Okay.
Yes.
But so why should, because always the why isn't there, a line down the street or protests in front of on the Washington Mall? Why do I feel there's a lack of urgency with regard to closing the gap and first marching towards immersive financial education?
So I want to make sure I understand your question. You're saying why are people?
Why isn't everyone alarmed?
I think there's a privilege in being able to have the ability to think about these things. I don't want to negate that. And there's a privilege that even I hold, right? And to be able to obtain 3 degrees, to be able to have the space to think about that. A lot of people are, because this wealth gap exists, a lot of people are living, not everybody, but there are individuals who are living, much closer to paycheck, and they're more focused on their day to day. They don't have the luxury to think beyond that, right? And it's not a present concern. I don't know that we're talking about it enough in our communities either. And so that's where I think a lot of our community pillars could be doing a little bit more to talk about the importance of financial education, financial literacy. But even in that conversation, even in my research, there's an importance to acknowledge racial capitalism, right? So even, all the education and literacy in the world is still not going to eliminate the wealth gap if there aren't, systemic changes that are made to ensure that we don't have income gaps, that we don't have all of these other disparities that tend to trickle down and affect why we see the wealth gap as it is. But certainly education is a start for a lot of our individuals to at least be able to think about how they can best position themselves.
So to be clearer, how does it show up in community wealth gaps? How does it, and when we talk about wealth, what does that mean? Are we talking about financial security? Are you saying that the goal is to play 100 or generational year catch up? Exactly what are we doing, trying to get secure? What exactly should we tackle if a person who's not part of government is just listening to this broadcast?
So I think there was a lot of questions there. I'm trying to address them, and feel free to kind of to redirect me. I think when it comes to the racial wealth gap, what that means, that is specifically literally the wealth difference between white and Black America. And so, for example, a stat was like in 2021, the typical white household had 9.2 times more wealth than the typical Black household, right? And that ratio stood even higher at 13.3 in 2019. And so that is something that is typically what's talked about when we're thinking about the actual wealth gap. What is wealth for individuals? Is it financial security? Absolutely. So I think what was interesting, what was really interesting about the research that I did and talking to Black college students, how they define wealth. And it was really cool to hear them define wealth as well as just overall well-being, right? So wealth can take on a lot of different definitions. And it is individual. I think it's important for people to know that you get to individually define what wealth means for you. So if that is financial stability, it doesn't mean that everybody needs to be a millionaire or a billionaire. It's just really about, I do think that having a solid financial well-being is a minimum starting point. And for financial well-being, that's an individual's ability to cover their known expenses in any known instances and be able to comfortably address those and any potential issues or any financial burdens that might come up in the future.
How does that play out in general society? Let's just someone's listening to this podcast and they're not from the Black community or the at large. What would they say? Wow, that's probably because of financial insecurity or wealth gaps in the Black community. What does it look like that that's happened? The symptoms of that. When you're saying that there are generational wealth gaps, what does that look like, particularly if you're not from the Black community?
Yeah, so there are wealth gaps in general. And so there's a large wealth gap. And so what it looks like is it shows up in a lot of different ways. It shows up in communities. It shows up in your communities that are considered Black communities in the neighborhoods. It shows up in the resources that you see in those neighborhoods. It shows up in the quality in which those neighborhoods tend to look. It shows up in the number of homeowners versus non-homeowners. It shows up in a lot of different ways. But those are just to name a few.
And how have government policies contributed to those wealth gaps over the last, let's say, 50, 100 years?
So if I have to do the math to go back to 100 years, I'm not sure, right? But we know it started, even though people don't like to talk about it, but we know it started with slavery, right? So once slavery ended, And when wealth was not distributed at that time in the way that it was originally promised to Black people, right, that they were going to have access to wealth, that didn't happen. So that was the start. And then you think about ways in which Black communities have attempted to regain wealth within their communities and how those things have been dismantled, whether it's through integration or whether it's through other things. When you think about Tulsa and the Wall Street thing, when it comes to, we still know that home ownership is one of the main and key ways to developing wealth. And we know that there was this practice for several years around redlining, and it may or may not formally exist, but there's still a lot of practices when it comes to lending, the policies and the credit, as I was mentioning, right? Like the income and things that are needed to be able to qualify for a loan and purchase a home, just create these barriers for to entry for individuals, and it doesn't help the inflation that we're currently seeing as it relates to the cost of living post-pandemic as well. That's also making things harder for individuals who don't own.
What shocked you in your research that many of your colleagues are not talking about at all? What surprised you?
I think, I wish I could say I was overly surprised. I don't think there was much that was surprising, but I think truly understanding the depth, and by depth, I mean just sort of like the time, the history of these things. Like I said, when you think about racial capitalism and how, this country was essentially built on racial capitalism, literally built on it. Slaves used to be the original currency before we had currency, right? And so the idea that just really thinking about how far back this goes can feel overwhelming at times, I think, because when we think about, well, how do we eradicate it? And maybe we don't eradicate it, but it's more so how do we at least come together as a community and at least increase our wealth? Because I'm not sure, that in my lifetime or yours, we'll be able to right that wrong. Certainly not without some major policy changes, which, are not looking highly likely right now in this current political environment.
So the name of your podcast is Race, Wealth, and Health. Mm-hmm. Health? How does health impact, why is health under those two other pillars of race and wealth? Explain that to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, coming from a private wealth background, wealth was important, right? And of course, race, when we talk about the racial wealth gap, but health is such a big part of it. I think for me, to be completely transparent, I wanted to add in there just for my own sort of personal health journey, but also understanding the implications of health. And so I've had a couple of individuals on the podcast who've talked about some of the health disparities within the Black community. We tend to be, even for diseases where we don't technically have more, actually my last podcast guest, Dr. Brittany Lane, was on talking about Black women's health specifically and disparities there. And so even for diseases where Black people are not necessarily any more predisposed, we still tend to have a higher mortality rate. And a lot of that has to do with access. What is access? Access to quality providers, access to good insurance that will cover it, the ability to get the early detection, the ability to have a doctor who actually listens to you, number one, right? Have the insurance to go in the office, then have a doctor who actually listens to you, and you're able to have whatever necessary treatments, whatever necessary early screenings and things of that nature. Wealth affects where you live, right? It affects your neighborhood. We see, going back to the point of like neighborhood, a lot of times in communities of color, in Black communities, let me just say that, make clear, Black communities, we don't always have, depending on the community, we don't always have the access to the freshest food, access to the freshest produce. That's where you'll see a lot of, there's been a lot of information. I had another guest on talking about the food journey and how food has been weaponized against the Black community. We've all sort of heard this idea of food deserts. But you have that, and you especially have it when it comes to healthy foods. So our health is so intertwined with our wealth and our race, right? Because the quality of care that we get when we are in the care of physicians is largely impacted by our race, and is largely impacted by our wealth and our access to quality insurance.
Is the answer or one of the answers uh, financial inclusion? And if so, what is financial inclusion? What does that look like?
Yeah, I don't know if that's the answer. You when you say financial inclusion, tell me what you mean by that
Well,
before I
it's
can.
not, it's, first of all, for example, I can include everyone and invite them into my financial house.
Mhm.
That's lovely. And leave them there in my financial house. However, if the invited guests had no understanding on how to navigate that
Mhm.
financial house and don't have the education for a long term and to decide whether or not to reside in that financial house long term, then financial inclusion in and of itself to me is not an actionable, it sounds nice, want everybody included. But in terms of particularly culturally diverse communities, I don't know that that is uh, the final answer. Maybe it's a kind of an invite, but for many communities, particularly those communities that have entrenched poverty, I think of in
Yeah.
Mississippi, entrenched
Mhm.
poverty. The idea of financial inclusion, does that accelerate their opportunity to live a financially secure life? I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
I would love to hear your viewpoint on that.
Yeah, so I will say I have not necessarily done or been super well versed in proposals around financial inclusion, but certainly it doesn't sound like it's the answer in and of itself. And I don't know that there's any one thing that is the answer. Let me say that. And also, let me say that even with my research, I don't propose to have the answers, but I think it's a lot more than any one thing. It's multiple things, right? Because let's say even the idea that's been thrown out quite a bit, reparations. Even that alone, right, doesn't solve it if we aren't making sure that the same communities that are getting access to the resources are able to best utilize those resources. I mean, how many times have we seen individuals win the lottery, right? And then before you know it, that money is gone. And so it's important. I don't think there's any one specific answer. I think there's a lot of things that need to happen and be in play. You know, there can be reparations, there needs to be education, there also needs to be policy changes that ensure that we don't end up right back here again with the inequalities. And so it's a lot of systemic things that do need to come together for us to really see substantial change on a community level versus individual level, right?
So yesterday, Oxfam released their generational wealth disparities report. It's entitled "Inequality: A Global Corporate Power Report." I encourage everyone to read it. But one of their recommendations is to rein in corporate power, including by breaking up monopolies and democratizing patent rules, reinventing inclusive and sustainable businesses. And then they talked about not only in the United States, but also they referred to the wealth gaps on the continent of Africa as well. As so the so-called bottom of the economic pyramid tends to grow with maybe the top five richest people or wealthiest people tends to
Mhm.
become more narrow. Any thoughts on this research?
Yeah, I mean, again, I have not read it in depth, but I did skim some of the information. I think it's some very interesting findings. I definitely see how monopolies and corporate monopolies definitely play a part of some of what we've seen. I mean, it's capitalism at its best, right? And so capitalism exists where one group, whatever that group is, it tends to be able to benefit disproportionately over another group. And so um, I think, yeah, I think we're going to continue to see those issues when we have when capitalism is at play, and especially when we have things such as monopolies, which is, you know, capitalism at its best. And so, what does that mean though in terms of moving our society that is literally built on capitalism, right? Like our whole thing is American dream. You can come here and you can pull yourself up by the bootstraps and you can make all this money, and but nobody ever talks about on the heels of whom, right? On the other side of that, right? Because if you're making all the money, then what does that mean? And then it's the idea of, is it a zero-sum game, right? If we share, because that actually came up. I remember having a conversation with a colleague of mine. It's like, well, it's a zero-sum game. If we're sharing the wealth, and what does that mean for the others? Do they now have less wealth? And I think is, you know, it's a lot to unpack. And I think there's some recommendations that definitely make sense. But I think they're gonna have to sell people on why they should do that. And I don't know that that's I don't know how likely it is. It's just it's so ingrained in the entire fabric of our country that I think it'll be really hard to turn away from it.
And according to the Oxfam report, it says the world's 5 richest men have more than doubled their fortunes from $405 billion to $869 billion since 2020 at a rate of 14 million per hour, while nearly 5 billion people have been made poor. If current trends continue, they write, the world will have its first trillionaire within a decade, but poverty will not be eradicated for another 229 years. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could say it's surprising, but it's not. Again, for me, and not to sound like a broken record, it's capitalism for one person to rise. And so maybe it is kind of a zero-sum game, right? Like if they're getting more wealth, it has to be coming from somewhere. So it means somebody else is not getting access to that. And we certainly as a country has not shown that there's any type of model that allows the wealth to be distributed from those top, 4 or 5 individuals or even corporations into communities to larger bodies of individuals. It doesn't happen. And so, yeah, the richer will get richer and the poorer will get poorer if we don't really think about some of the policies. And I can't say the specific policies because I am not a lobbyist or in that space, but there's definitely some things that we need to think about in terms of, the way our tax laws are written, ensuring that some of these people are paying more taxes because they have more money, right? And so right now, a lot of our tax laws tend to be very favorable to our richer individuals, and figuring some of those things out to the report's suggestion around monopolies, right? Disbanding some of the monopolies, putting some additional restrictions in place to create more competition, allows more individuals to get into these markets, and increasing, minimizing the barriers to entry for others to get into the market. Because if they had more competition, to the point, they would not be able to just profit. But yeah, the fact that the majority of the wealth is held in a small number of individuals is not at all surprising to me.
And when we were referring to financial inclusion, my concern is that there's a lot of very almost criminal information that's being floated out on the worldwide scammy web. Scammy. And so even though everyone can have access to it, a lot of information, particularly if it's provided by someone who's not licensed, an unlicensed person that just have a YouTube of followers, that's not financial inclusion. That's one of the the negatives, the cons regarding, no pun intended, but that's some of the cons.
Well, I was going to say there is such a thing as predatory inclusion. And so that has also affected the Black community a lot, predatory inclusion in certain things, from the idea of understanding that certain members of the Black community didn't have an understanding of some of the things. I think the housing market crash is definitely an example of predatory inclusion in some of those instances. And so absolutely, there's a lot of predatory content out there that's not, they're just concerned with making money, and not truly concerned with making sure that individuals are actually getting the information and able to better their situations.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, is there any final thoughts you would like to leave with our listeners, and how can they reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the only thoughts is just, the one thing I'd say is just continue to be curious, right? Get information. To Sabrina's point, be thoughtful about who and where you're gathering the information from. There's a lot of really reputable organizations out there. Plug or no plug, Wikiza is one. You have, NEFI.org. There's a lot of different federal organizations that are out there doing the work, trying to provide financial education information. So I would just say to get curious, be open. There are a lot of great individuals who provide information as well. And in terms of how they can reach me, well, you can reach me individually. I'm pretty much on all of the social media platforms. Joycelyn Morris here on LinkedIn. I am at Joycelyn C. Morris on Instagram. You can also follow the podcast at Race Wealth Health on Instagram and Facebook. And then if you want to contact me, my website is www.joycelyncmorris.com.
Dr. Joycelyn Morris, thank you so much for joining us here at Planet Waukesha.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sabrina.